All right, today we're going to be talking about using the Blackboard text box editor. So presumably you've actually been in Blackboard before, or else some of this will come as quite a shock. Let's take a look at what we're going to be talking through today. First of all, just basically what the visual text box editor is in Blackboard, and then we're going to look at the toolbars that are set up in it and the basic controls for what you can do to, make text pretty, and also a couple of keyboard shortcuts. I'm not going to go overboard on that. I know the shortcuts I'm going to cover in this session either you already know or you should already know, so it'll be good. And then a little in detail into a couple of the mashup tools that are available through the visual text box editor as well. Okay, so let's move on. What is the visual text box editor? Well, a lot of the time in Blackboard's documentation, you'll see it abbreviated as VTBE, even though they insist on making text box one word like that. So the visual text box editor, the VTBE, that's what we're talking about. And there's another term that you might hear associated with that, and that's WYSIWYG, how you pronounce that. That's actually an acronym standing for what you see is what you get. You hear this a lot in reference to web page editing, where you're actually controlling the page like it should appear in browsers, or technically, like a word processor is usually a WYSIWYG editor as well. So as you change the text on the screen, it's going to look like what the final product should look like. Okay. To take a look at the visual text box editor as it shows up in Blackboard right now, that's the puppy. So here's where we're going to start talking about some of the functions that are available in it. First and foremost is the ability to turn it off. So when you go into Blackboard to any of the places that has this, and I'll list a few of them in a moment, whenever you see this, there should be a control right up in the top right corner that says the text box editor is, and it's either a switch in the on position or the off position. Most of the time it's going to be on by default unless you've manually turned it off. It'll stay that way. There are a couple of instances when you might want to turn off the visual text box editor. In general, just whenever it's not behaving for you, you can turn it off and just edit text in a simpler mode without all these controls. Another time that it's necessary to turn off the text editor is if you are using some device like an iPad where the visual text box editor won't function properly. Apparently on iPads, if you tap to start typing into the visual text box editor, it does not recognize that as a field for text. So you have to turn the editor off, and then you can change your text and turn it back on again for later. So pretty isolated cases when that is necessary, but there's always a switch up there to turn it off when you need it. Okay. At its base, the idea is you're going to be putting some text into the main box, and then you're going to be modifying the text with these controls in the toolbars up top. Okay? There's a lot of stuff the text box editor can do that I'm not planning on really covering today unless there's specific questions. But I want to hit the high points on what you can and should be doing to your text to make it work out pretty well. So for right now, there's going to be just, I'll point out the controls and tell you what they're for. And then if there's questions or if we need to drill down to it, I can actually show a demonstration of this in action as well. For starters, up in the topmost of the three toolbars, you have the control. It always defaults to saying normal. That's the paragraph type. Normal is what you want almost always. So you can pretty safely ignore this menu unless you're trying to establish different paragraph types on the page, like heading 1 or heading 4. Most of the time, though, normal is what you want. Similarly, there's a text size control. Now, this is very different than the text size controls that you might be used to in like a word processor. In Word, what you actually will set on the drop-down menu for size is the point size of the type, or if you've configured things, it might be a different scale, but the default is points. So oh, here 12-point type, 10-point type. That's not what this number is all about. It's a totally different measurement scale, and frankly, it's horribly confusing. That you get a scale from 1 to 7, 7 being really, really huge. 3 is the default size, and if you just never change it from 3, that's probably fine, unless there's some specific reason to make like a line of heading be a larger size or something. Modifying the text size a great deal, probably not something you'll want to do. And on the third stop on our tour, also another probably not something you'll want to do, you can control the exact font of the text, but anyone with any experience putting together web pages will tell you that trying to set a specific font on anything that's going to be consumed in a web browser, like Blackboard content is, it's just not a great idea. The default, at least on my computer, was to show Arial for the Visual Text Box Editor. I'm not certain if it shows that on all computers and it's a hard-coded thing, or if it's actually dependent upon the fonts on your computer. Pretty much I'd suggest ignoring this. Trying to micromanage your fonts in the Blackboard Visual Text Box Editor is not going to be a great experience. So, yeah, isn't that great? I start off with 3 different things to not do. So let's get on to some things that will be useful. Things that you might be familiar with from using a word processor. The bold, italics, underline, that fourth one there is strike through. So you could actually have text and highlight it and click that button and it'll put a line through the middle of it as if you were, redacting something, as it were. You also have subscript and superscript buttons. And in all those cases, you would highlight the text you want to modify and then click the button and it would have that effect on it. That is one of the few things in the Visual Text Box Editor that works exactly like what a word processor would do. So get comfortable with those. You do have some paragraph justification choices. You have left aligned, centered, and right aligned. Most of the time you'll probably be using either the default, which is left aligned paragraph, or for like a title or a subheader somewhere in the middle of a block of text, you might want to center a single line or an image that you've put into the editor. But unless you're really playing around, you probably won't ever use the right justification button. And one thing that is missing from this that you might be used to seeing in a word processor is the full justification, where it's supposed to line up both margins of text in a nice, neat thing. That just doesn't work out on web pages, so they don't even have a control for it here. Let's actually even skip over these because they're not all that useful, and we'll talk a little more about the next 2 buttons on this menu, the little 1, 2, 3 and the bullet, bullet, bullet buttons. Those are for making ordered and unordered lists. They work exactly the same as what you'd be used to in a word processor. If you already have several lines of text and you select them, and you were to click like the numbered list button, it would indent them and put numbering at the start of each line. Or if you click the unordered list button, it would put bullet points at the front of each line. Also of use when you're making those lists are the final 2 buttons on the first toolbar. The indent controls. It always confuses me. You have to look at the icon of the button to keep them straight, or at least I do. The first of these buttons is actually to change the indentation to the left. Almost always what I want is the final one to indent towards the right. So what that would mean, if you just had a paragraph of text, you could select it and click the indent to the right, and it would inset the text from the rest of the lines in the screen and make that text stand out, kind of like having a block quote in a bunch of text. What you would get if you had a numbered list and then you picked one line out of it and indented it to the right is that that would become a sublist of the ordered type. So you'd get like, 1, 2, A, B, C, 3, that sort of a thing with your list structure if you set it up. And I can show you that in the demonstration later. It's trivially easy to understand when you see it in action. Okay, next toolbar down. The first option that you get on there is probably familiar as being a spell check button. The function of that spell check is not quite the same as what you might expect in a word processor, just because of the limitations of the way that the spell check has to run on a website. But it does an okay job of picking up words that are misspelled or words that might be misspelled. Chances are you won't use it a lot if you have another spell checker built into your computer that's going to work in your web browser. So if you're using the IE spell with Internet Explorer or whatever the heck the Chrome and Firefox extensions are called for spell checking, it's just going to behave in a way that's probably more familiar than this spell check that's built into Blackboard. The next buttons along here are actually cut, copy, and then finally paste, so that you can use these buttons on the toolbar to do the kind of copy paste commands that you might be used to doing in a word processor. The good news, and I'll show you when we get down to the keyboard shortcuts, is that the same commands that you're used to using, hopefully used to using, will work for the copy and paste functions in the Visual Textbox editor. You also have undo and redo buttons, and another good piece of advice is if you're used to the keyboard shortcuts for undo and redo, those will also work here. Okay, bypassing those for the moment. We have this next one, looks like a little globe, and when you're actually using the Visual Textbox editor, one of the things you'll probably find yourself doing when you're looking for some control is to just point at these things and watch the tooltips that come up, because that really helps if you don't intuitively know that that little globe means creating a hyperlink. Unfortunately, there's a lot of standards, which really means there are no standards across programs for what icon to use to represent a link. In this case, they use a globe to indicate that you're going to some other location. So, link, sure. And when you would click that button, it would, well, you'd want to have some text selected and click the hyperlink button, and then it would bring a pop-up window up where you could tell it where you want the link to point to. The next button over is for adding tables, which is what I would consider beyond a basic function in Blackboard. If you're really trying to have tabular data show up, it should either be a very simple table, or you should do it in some other program and attach a file for students to use. Complex tables, like the type that you might be used to building in Word or Excel, you probably don't want to try to replicate manually in the Visual Textbox editor. I mean, the controls are there, but they're not as easy as any of those other programs. Okay, the little A with a red underline there is changing text color. So you'd highlight some text and then click this button, and you could choose what color to make it. Similarly, the little yellow bar with the marker pen on it, that's a highlighter, which instead of changing the color of the text, will change the color of the background behind the text. So between those two controls, you can change the foreground text color and the background behind the text. Now, I always feel obliged to give that warning when it comes to color coding things for your students. Well, 2 points really. The first is that you should keep in mind that some people, more men than women, but some people are colorblind. So it's possible that you'll set things to a color that they literally cannot see. I've seen it happen. So the other thing to bear in mind is you can get some serious readability problems if you don't have enough contrast between the text color and the background. So you should probably try to avoid having lighter colored text or even moderately colored text against a moderately colored background. And for heaven's sake, don't try to turn your text white on a white background or black text on a black background. That just won't work out well. Okay, the next set of buttons have to do with some really esoteric functions, so I'll hit them very quickly here rather than trying to drill in depth on them unless there's questions. The first control is for adding math equations, and if you've ever used the equation editor that's built into Microsoft Office, this is the analog of that. So you can build some fairly complex mathematical equation structures, but it's also cumbersome to use. The next button in is if you're really accustomed to creating mathematical equations, you probably have experienced the MathML language, and if you had any of that, you could just drop it right in using that tool. But almost nobody has experience with that except people who do it all the time. So if that didn't mean anything to you, you probably don't need to know about it. The next button over that's just a what is that, a less than greater than sign, one right after the other, that is going to give you HTML mode. HTML meaning hypertext markup language, the code that makes up web pages. And it's an unhappy thing when it has to happen, but once in a while you might need to hit this button and see all of the HTML code behind the scenes to tweak something or to maybe add some code that you've had to copy from elsewhere. The whole point of the Visual Textbox Editor is to insulate you from ever needing to see the HTML code, but every so often something will come up where it's important. Okay, the next button over is actually a preview. So if you have some fairly complex text down in this area that you've marked up properly and you want to preview it before you submit it, you could hit that next to the last button. And the final button on there is, as near as I can tell, pretty much pointless. It's an HTML validation tool that just doesn't seem to do much, so feel free to ignore that one. All right, the first two bars you're going to see on pretty much all of the Visual Textbox editors. This third bar, occasionally you will not have this as a choice. For example, if you are pasting or if you're creating an announcement, you probably are not going to have this third toolbar available. But if you are adding an item, if you're making a discussion board post, you're probably going to see this stuff. Tooltips will help you out a lot when it comes to figuring out which of these buttons you want, but they're all geared towards adding non-textual things, or almost always non-textual things. The first entry is attaching a file, and that's different than what you might be used to of attaching a file to an item. It actually shows up in line as if it was just a web page with a link that you'd click on right in the middle of the text, but to an external file rather than a website like the hyperlink tool would get you. So at least that one's a fairly memorable icon for attaching a file. You get a little paper clip on a sheet of paper, so that should be easy enough to remember. The next one over is the ability to add an image. Okay, so if you have your block of text and you want to put some graphic in the middle of it to break up the text, or something that you want to have students look at that point in their reading, you can use the Insert Image button, and it pops up a little window and asks you to attach the image file and so forth. And so we can see that in the demo in a couple of minutes. The other buttons along here, I really don't recommend using that much. They're for adding like audio files and QuickTime video files and even Flash video. Chances are there are better ways to make these files available to your students than just attaching them in the middle of the Visual Textbox Editor. But in all those cases, they're going to pop up some window to let you attach some other media type. And then the final entry on that third toolbar is the Mashup tool menu, and we'll go into that in greater detail later. Okay, so that was a whole lot of talk about the toolbars, but there's one other thing worthy of note in this Visual Textbox Editor, and that's the gray bar down along the bottom. Okay, what you're looking at on the screen right now is well, depending on how large you have this showing up on your computer, it's the default size that it's probably going to show up in Blackboard. But if you need more length to see your text in or to edit, you can actually grab this gray bar at the bottom and drag it down, and the rectangle that the text goes in here will get longer. So it makes it a little easier to work in the visual text box editor with more than just a couple of sentences of text, so you can actually expand it out. Similarly, if you are done working with it, you can just grab that bar and pull it up, and it'll shrink down the area to much less of the screen, so you can work around it easily. All right. Moving away from that little screenshot here, talking about these shortcuts that are available, these are the 5 that I think people should care about. Bold, italics, underline, copy, and paste. Chances are you already knew these. I mean, Control-B for bold, that's a standard. Control-C and Control-V for copy and paste. If you didn't know those keyboard shortcuts already, you need to memorize those right now. If you're watching the archive, go ahead and pause, memorize them, and start up again later. They're that important when you're moving things around. And of course, if you're on a Mac, instead of holding Control and pressing those letters, you'd be holding the Command button and pressing the C or the B or whatever. So what you would do if you wanted to have some underlined text, you would select the text and then just hit Control-U on your keyboard, and it would automatically just underline the text without your having to go up and click on the underline button. I went looking for an exhaustive list of what keyboard shortcuts would work with the Visual Text Box Editor, and frankly, when I found the list, these were the only ones I thought mattered. So the rest of them, there are other shortcuts that will work, but you probably won't ever care about them. All right? Okay, away from the keyboard here. Let's take a look at that final Mashup tool menu. Right now, this is what the Mashup tool menu would look like on our sandbox and production Blackboard environments, where there's a lot of tools that are either built into Blackboard or that we have added to the system that you can easily just plug into whatever the Visual Text Box Editor is that you're working with. You can add content from Flickr, or you can add some content that you have uploaded to SlideShare. Very few people use these. There's the ability to add the YouTube video and just embed it right in along with your text. That can be very useful, and I can give you include a step-by-step handout on how to do that along with this presentation. We have right now at Palomar the choice to use NBC Learn content, which is holdings from NBC that they've digitized, but you can give that a try, see if there's any content in there you want. The bottom entry on here is also something that I'll give you a guide about. The Wimba Voice Authoring is a fantastic little tool that lets you leave a recording of your voice right in the middle of your text, so that you could have a paragraph of explanation and then leave a recording of you pointing out a couple of little issues and then go back to more text. So it's a way to have more than just text in your items or your discussion board posts or whatever. You could actually have some mixed media and include your voice in there. And then in the demo, I also want to show you there's a special tool for pasting if you get content from a Word document. That can sometimes make it a better experience. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to throw the gates open and ask if there's any questions from the audience. And it looks like there aren't. Nope, there are not. Okay. Well, in that case, I'd say it's time to start showing a couple of these functions in the Visual Text Box Editor. Oh, we do have a question that was texted in. The color blindness issue. Well, yeah, red-green color blindness is the most common, but what can also happen is the inability to see certain shades of colors. In fact, the one personal experience I had with this, I was working with an instructor who was trying to color code content in his course. And he had this great elaborate scheme in mind where he was going to color code all of the items that were assignments yellow, and all of the tests were going to be red. And he had this great mind map of what he wanted to accomplish with that. And he was setting it up that way. And then we were scrolling through this list of content, and he says to me, "Well, that's funny. Where's that Chapter 8 outline?" And I said, "What are you talking about? It's right there on the screen." And he says, "No, it isn't." So he highlighted over the text and practically jumped out of his chair, because all of a sudden he could see it when it was selected text, but when it wasn't selected, the color that he'd picked for it, he literally could not see. So yeah, just something to be sensitive to with the color blindness. Unless there's a good reason, black on white is probably your friend. Okay. Oh, and another question, all right. Does the visual text box editor sometimes work differently when creating test items? If you have the visual text box editor going on a test item, I believe most of the time it's going to be fine. There's certain boxes that actually aren't the visual text box editor, where it's just like a single line of text to type into, but not an area like the text box editor is. But wherever you get that, it should work with at least the top 2 toolbars worth. It's possible that it might not have the third one for attaching files, but the first 2 certainly should be available wherever you see it in a test. Or anywhere else for that matter. I think I mentioned that it's available not just in items, but in that instructors add, but in the discussion board or the blog or the journal tool. Those are all pretty much the same interface for students, where they get the visual text box editor as well, so they would have access to the ability to mark up their text and even use things from the Mashup tool menu. So a student responding to a discussion board post could include a embedded YouTube video very easily, or a student responding to the making a journal post could actually leave a Wimba voice authoring component in there. So you can actually leverage some of those more advanced components even in the tools where students are making submissions. Strangely, that's not the case if they're submitting an assignment. The first box on the assignment submission does not have the visual text box editor available, so it's just straight text. Okay, let me go ahead and give just a brief look then at the action of a visual text box editor. Start up the application sharing, and let's take a look at something that's available in our sandbox environment. Here is the visual text box editor. And first of all, I want to illustrate the ability to shrink or expand out the length of the visual text box area, so that if you were working with several paragraphs of text, it gets a little easier to see exactly what's going on. And to illustrate that a little more, let me grab some text here and paste it into place. This is just some lorem ipsum text. And you'll notice the little red jagged underlines out under everything here, or almost everything. Actually, it's kind of funny to see what pseudo-Latin the spell check on my computer thinks is normal. That's not from the Blackboard spell check tool, though. That's actually from the spell check tool that I have running in Firefox, which is the browser I'm using right now. So I guess on that topic, I'll show you what it looks like when you run the spell check on the visual text box editor. It opens up a new window, and it works kind of like what you would expect from a word processor, where it suggests another word and then a set of other words below it that you could choose, or you could just type in what you want to replace with and then use the replace or replace all. You can tell it with this learn button that you want it to remember some word that's not already in its dictionary, but that is specific to the computer that you're working on. So if you move between multiple computers, it's not going to keep that dictionary of words across the multiple computers. And then if you don't change anything at all, you can just say finish, and it should leave you alone. In this case, it's not, so I'm just going to go ahead and close it there. Oh, it said spell check complete even though it didn't close all the way. That's just great. Let's see. Just to show you what it looks like, we'll go ahead and select something. You can make it bold. You can choose something, italicize it, although I bet that's a little hard to see through the screen here. You can underline things. So it works more or less like a word processor for that sort of thing. The idea of having multiple paragraphs that you want turned into a list, like if I wanted to make these 3 paragraphs that I select into a list, I could just click the numbered list button and it will convert to that. And then if I really wanted this middle paragraph to be a subpoint of number 1, I could indent it. And that's the first subpoint of number 1. And then I can add the second subpoint with whatever my text is there. So that works very similar to what you might be used to from Microsoft Word or some other word processor like that. One thing that should be close but isn't is the text color. So if I choose the font color button here, instead of just letting me pick, it brings up a whole new window where I can either pick a color off of the list. And all of these colors have what are rather amusing, to me at least, names. Like this is red, red, pink. And we can get dark pink red and yellow, yellow spring, go figure. Or if you're the type that likes micromanagement control over the exact color you're setting something to, you can put in the hex color value of the exact color you want. And just remember that if you decide, which I would say is most of the time the best thing, to go back to black text, that's going to be your bottom leftmost entry, or you can just put straight zeros into the color value box. But I'll go ahead and pick a nice, oh, that's standard red, all right, and I say apply, and then the text that I had selected is going to be that red color. I'd say most of the time if you just want to emphasize 1 or 2 words, you're probably pretty safe using red text, but you know, you don't want to overdo it. Too much red text on the screen can make your eyes hurt. Okay, so I was also going to show you adding in something using these mashup menus. All right, I open up the mashup menu and I could add something from, say, YouTube. And it brings up a little pop-up menu. And if you already know exactly what you're looking for on YouTube, one thing that you can do is just copy the address and paste that into this search box. Or if you know who uploaded the video you're looking for. Like if I'm looking for one video that I uploaded, I could pick my YouTube name and just tell it to search for all of my own videos. And it comes back with a listing of everything that I've uploaded. So I could pick out one of my own videos, like here's one that I did on some general information on Blackboard. I could preview it, or I could just hit the select link here, and it would give me a chance to rename this thing and maybe tidy it up a little. There's controls for what to show. The default view when you're using most of the mashup tools is to add a thumbnail, and I always recommend that as the default behavior. That just works out really, really well. And then in the case of the YouTube videos, do I want to show the URL or the information? I'm going to just say no on both of those. And then submit this, and it adds it right into the text box area. So I could put this in the middle of a block of text. I could intersperse a couple of lines of text, a video, some more text, and then maybe an image, and really glitz it up in the text box editor. And you can see that when you start getting this sort of amount of material in there, it can really help to expand out the length of the text box editor so you can see more at once. Can the text wrap around the video? Good question, and the short answer is no. It would be possible to set it up so it will, but it takes some tinkering, and it's what I would consider too frustrating a skill for most people to accomplish. The same is true about even adding an image. It is possible to do, but usually you end up delving into the HTML code. And perhaps just to tell you why I discourage that for people, let me toggle over to the HTML source mode, and you can get a look at what the HTML code looks like that comes through with that video. And there is, yes, eek is the correct response. There's just so much stuff in there that actually everything from here up, this is just that little block of video. So as I say, it would be possible to go in and tweak things so that you could text wrap around it. It just wouldn't be simple to do. At any rate, one of the things that I find the most challenging when I'm setting up an item in Blackboard, like I am right now, and I've got everything set up properly in the Visual Text Box editor, is then I end up having to remind myself to name the darn thing before I hit the submit button. Otherwise it throws an error for me. So is there anything else that the audience wants to see demonstrated in this?
I don't want to run over long on this.
Center something, David.
Oh, center something, yes. Absolutely. Of course, most of these paragraphs of text won't look really good centered, so let's get a nice, we'll have like a little header line here. So we'll say, there, title line. And so you would select it, or actually you don't even need it selected, anywhere on the line, and then you would just click the center button, and it pops it out to the middle of the screen. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that is a true center. So if someone has a really narrow screen, it's going to be centered on that narrow screen, and then if they drag their window wider, it will end up keeping that text centered on their screen as it gets wider. So it kind of shifts things around. But that's just life when you're publishing on the internet. So does that more or less cover what we wanted to see on the editor? No more questions? All right. Well, in that case, that concludes our demonstration, and in fact concludes the entire webinar.
Thank you very much. Very helpful.
Oh, thank you for attending.
Thank you for attending.